Without you, we could not do all the wonderful things that the ACLJ is accomplishing on a daily basis. You're about to hear one of our success stories, and it's from Pastor Nerren, who was a pastor from Tennessee. And typically when we talk about Christian persecution, we're thinking about, people that live in other countries, but it's usually not a U.S. citizen that we're thinking about. And Pastor Nerren is a U.S. citizen from Tennessee who was arrested, put in prison, and then detained in India for 7 months. You're going to hear his story. We could not have helped him. We could have not had the success that we did on his case without you. At the ACLJ, we are committed to defending religious liberty, whether that's here in the United States or abroad.
My name is Brian Nerren. I'm a pastor here in Tennessee in the United States of America. 4 years ago, I was being held as a hostage of being an American Christian helping poor children in India. And the American Center for Law and Justice came to my defense and got me back home and have reunited me with my family. I had been traveling to Nepal and India for 18 years. Our purpose there was to teach teachers to teach children so that they could emerge from poverty, that they could have a better life because they were given an education. It is not the custom or the legal right of a child in the lower caste system to learn how to read and write in India and Nepal. So we would go in, hire a tailor, buy 300 uniforms in a village at a time, and send 300 kids to school for their first time ever and overwhelm the school system. The local governments were happy about it. October the 5th was like any other trip that we had made. By then I'd made 32 or 3 trips over. We arrived at the Delhi airport. It's the most chaotic international airport on earth. The security officer that I ended up talking to first, he said, what is this package you have? I said, it's money that I'm taking. And he says, okay. He took me to his supervisor. His supervisor looked at the money. They never counted it. They just looked at it. And I had $20,000 in one package, $20,000 in another. And he says, what are you doing? What's going on? Explained it to him that we were taking the money to Nepal, not to India, but we might do a project in India if we could. And he says, okay, it's not a problem. Well, I understand. Then they called for a customs official. And a guy came in and he asked all the same questions. The unique question that had never been asked before, though, is are you a Christian? Will you meet with Christians in India? And did you plan to give any of this money to any Indian Christians while you're here? They never looked at the money. It was laying on the table. It was in bundles, 20,000 and 20,000. They never opened the bundles. They never checked the numbers. They took my word for it that there was $40,000 there. They only wanted to know what Christians I was going to meet, what Christian work I was doing, and everything was about being a Christian. The additional Secretary of Customs in Calcutta told me, he said, this has nothing to do with the facts or the law or the Constitution, because I kept bringing that up to him. And he said, this is about an order from the central government of Delhi to stop every Christian ministry or group coming into India from being able to lie and tell the poor people they could have a better life. It was about maintaining the caste system. Well, ACLJ was in the scene before I knew it. My wife knew a friend that knew Cece. And they had already went to work for me, and I still didn't know anything or anybody. That night, they took me out, and as they were taking me out, I said, well, I need this machine. I use a CPAP machine to sleep at night. They didn't know anything about the machine. They didn't understand any of it, any of the customs people. So they took me to a medical clinic. It was after 10 o'clock at night, and they asked the doctor who came in, it was a lady, and her first word to me, what is this machine? What does it work? And they didn't understand any of it. But her first words, she said, are you a Christian? I said, yes, I am. And she was chewing betel nut and snuff. And she spit all of that on my shoes. I went, are you a Christian? Yes. And she just spit all over me. She was so aggravated to have to help me. I ended up spending the first night under armed guard at a hospital in an emergency room where 10 people I watched die that night. It was a very tragic situation, but a normal Indian night at the ER. After that first night, they took me to court. The customs officer picked me up, got me some breakfast, took me to the court, and he said, now here's what's going to happen. He said, you're going to talk to the judge. They told me this the night before. He said, you're going to talk to the judge. He's going to fine you $200 for not having a yellow piece of paper from your declaration in Delhi. And you're going to pay the $200. They're going to give you your money back and give your stuff back, and they're going to let you go do what you've been doing. Well, none of that was even close to remotely being true. I was told to be quiet, not to speak up, and not to make eye contact with the judge. Just wait. And so they did stuff, and everything was done mixed. It's supposed to be by law in English in India, but I was in West Bengal, so it was partially Bengali, partially Hindu, partially in English, and I was not able to understand any of it. They took me out of that. They threw me in a panel wagon with those other drunk guys, and they took us off to prison. No explanation, no understanding, no nothing. Just get in the van. And I got in the van. They unloaded me at the prison. The warden came in the next morning, and the warden told me, and he brought all the jailers in. He said, under no circumstances is this man to be hurt, harmed, intimidated, or messed with. You treat him very good. He's an American citizen, and we don't want any of that trouble to happen. And he said, I personally will break the legs of whichever one of you allow him to get hurt or hurt you. It was still a prison. There was no facilities for showers or toilets or, it was just a very rough time. There was a big storm that night. And when the storm came, the water got about 6 inches to a foot deep in the cell where I was at. It came from the sewage into the building. There was raw sewage everywhere. Even the rats began to climb up in the beds with us so that they wouldn't have to be in the sewer water. The next morning after the storm, the sun came up, and when the sun came up behind the cell that I was in, when it showed through the bars, it put the sign of a cross at the foot of the bed that I was sitting in. God kept reminding me that I had hope, it was going to be all right, even though I never really understood that hope until just before I came home. The warden told me when he did my closing interview when I was leaving, he said, your legal team out of the U.S. has been able to get you a bail, and you're going to get out early instead of the 30 days you should have stayed. He said, your bail agreement is a very simple bail agreement. He said, if we request you to be at the court, you have to be there immediately. If we come to your place where you're going to be staying, you have to be there. You don't have the privilege to travel. You don't have the privilege to move around. You naturally are not going to have your passport or your money or any identity, and you're confined to this part. If you violate any of the bail agreements, it's life in prison without a trial. There will be no exception. Don't break your bail agreement. Every Wednesday I was called to court, mainly to be sure I was still in the country. The thing that saved me, the thing that kept me from probably losing my mind or going crazy, was for 7.5 months, I either talked, emailed, or texted Cece Howe. She communicated, I don't think she missed a day. And she always knew what was going on behind the scenes, and she always knew what the legal score was. And she kept telling me, it may take some time, but we win because the law's in our favor. We made 5 different arrangements over my 7.5 months for me to come home, deals between the State Department of India and even once with President Trump, and none of it worked. I'd give up on the hope of ever being able to get home through that process. But then it worked. It went through April the 2nd. At the speed of Indian justice, I was finally released on the 15th of May, 6 weeks later. It was still emotional to walk down that entrance back into the airport and see my 3 grandkids, my kids, my wife, and to be reunited, which by then we wasn't really sure it was ever going to happen. I spent a lot of time praying about, God, I don't think I'm tough enough to spend 7 years in an Indian prison, but I will if you think it's a good idea. I'm glad it didn't. And Cece was there. I was so happy to hug Cece because she'd saved my life and my family, but I was hugging everybody as if it was the most outstanding, incredible thing to breathe genuine American freedom for the first time in 7.5 months. I owe my life to them. They were there before I knew they were there, and they have always been there for me all the way through. and still today treat me like I'm somebody, and I know the truth, I'm not. But they're an organization, they're a group of people that are dedicated and committed to the things that matter most, giving people the opportunity to have humanity and decency, justice in their life, no matter what the evil, wicked part of the world wants to do to you. So I owe my life to the ACLJ.